Hello and what is good YouTube? Hydra slash Bradley here for another video, a follow-up to my last Bloblobber video where in the last video we were talking about a very different Bloblobber. A weapon that, while I did not admit to it, was a bottom 5 weapon. It had a really bad issue. And it got patched. The problem was fixed. And in this video, not only are we going to talk about how good I think Bloblobber is in this game currently, I'm going to talk about how to use its kit, because a lot of people seem to not understand the value of Sprinkler, which, fair, the way I use it is nowhere close to what is standard. And also we're going to talk about the changes between it now and what it was in the last video, as well as more things, because I've had more time to play this game and this weapon. Starting off with gear, let's just get it out of the way. My gear is not finished. This entire shirt's going to be swim speed. That sub special saver is also going to be swim speed. But first, let's swap off of any ink saver main so that we can show off the ink efficiency. Because when talking about Blob, this is something very important to go over before everything else. So, in terms of paints, Blob is still the same as it was in Splatoon 2. Though, just like in Splatoon 2, I'd highly advise running some level of Inksaver main. One sub or one main and one sub or 4 subs is what I would personally recommend. One sub is my personal preference because I like to focus a lot on mobility. And if you want to copy my build but want some more Inksaver main, just change the run speed to Inksaver main and you're good to go. Last but not least, so I don't have to talk about gear later, Last Ditch Effort is still broken as of the current patch. I'm on patch 1.1.2 and this could change with time, and I'm not going to lie to you. I hope it changes with time, because Last Ditch is so broken, almost everything in the game runs it. I would highly recommend this on Blob especially. If not, you run Comeback. One of the two, because they help Blob out so much with the ink efficiency route without having to invest much. Though, as of right now, Last Ditch is by far the better ability. Since we're on the topic of gear, and let's just get this all out of the way before we actually talk more about Blob, I like to focus a lot on mobility, because allowing me to focus on mobility means I can be more evasive, reposition better, and just in general be a harder target to hit. Swim speed especially is really important, and the reason why I'm going so all out on it, like 1 main and 5 subs is going to be my final build, is because swim speed stacks with Squid Roll. And Squid Roll is very important for Bloblobber, both learning how to use it and learning how to fight it. So Blob still follows a lot of the other rules that it did in Splatoon 2. Its blobs will hit the floor 2 times, the 3rd time it'll fizzle out. These 2 bounces do not count if they're wall bounces. Can I please stop being... You get the point. It bounces off the floor twice. If it bounces off the wall, it doesn't increment this count. Though there are some other changes that I can now confirm are not fake, and that are like actually a thing. We actually have to take off run speed to do this, as run speed does have an impact. Blob shots in general are just faster. In Splatoon 2, if you walked backwards and shot, your shot would slow down a noticeable bit. Like, you could tell it was slowing down. And if you walked faster, your shot would not faster. If you walked forward, your shot would be noticeably faster than when you weren't moving at all. This is still the case, but it's not by much. And this is actually a good thing, because overall, Blob's shot speed increased. While the loss of slow shot is interesting, I wouldn't call this a nerf. Being able to shoot fast while backing up is nice, and I actually was looking for a way to kind of cheat the system and get backwards fast shots anyways, because while it is nice to have your shots move slowly, having them move fast means they just get to the place faster. And by increasing velocity, this also improves Blob's kill time. This is also why I'm going to be trying out run speed for a while, because, well, when I did that shot, I held down the the squid button the entire time, and Blob is just kind of locked into walking for a bit. So what this allows me to do is allows me to make little micro repositionings. This is good for trying to deal with people who are moving, if you don't want to have to move your camera as much, or for allowing you to reposition better against people using Squid Roll. This isn't a necessity, it's more so like a quality of life thing that you can really go without. And I'm still trying to figure out whether run speed is of value or not. But just know that any kind of mobility will impact Blob's shots, just not as much as it did in Splatoon 2. Speaking of any kind of mobility impacting Blob's shots, a new movement tech was added to this game. Well, two technically, but one of them Blob cares a lot more about than the other. I actually lied. They're both amazing for Bloblobber. Let's talk about the one that's a lot less impressive first. Squid surging. When you're on a wall, hold down the B button, and it'll fling you up, as long as you're holding down the squid button. If you hold down the squid button until the very end, you do a little bounce up. If not, you do like an even smaller version in kid form. You can also cancel it at any point. And you can squid roll out of it. This is mostly nice because Blob has wall climbing issues, and this could be resolved through a squid roll if you do it right. Which is kind of a really weird way that Blob benefits from this, but it's Blob, so it's going to benefit from things in the weirdest ways. Speaking of which, before we cover some of the other really weird things that Blob still has, I want to talk about how this thing benefits from Squid Roll. So, on paper, Bloblobber hates Squid Roll. If I shoot at a moving target here, for example, I have to move my camera to get the whole shot to hit. And with the startup of the Squid Roll is a parry. This is bad for Blob, as one of its blobs will get parried. This means you will not Oko. So in theory, this becomes like the Tetra situation, where a lot of Bloblobber players dislike the matchup in 2 because Tetra could dodge. Well, just like in Splatoon 2, the matchup was still heavily Blob favored, even though Blob mains disliked the matchup. And I learned this very quickly when I realized, wow, Blob actually likes fighting things that are going to lock themselves in the movement. Because one big thing to note when you squid roll, you're locked into the air for a while. Number 2, you're also locked into a burst movement forward, or whatever direction you squid roll. This means that if a blob predicts you to squid roll, you're dead. There's nothing you can do. You just put yourself in the air. And if you're in the air, that is the most vulnerable position in this game. Even more so than standing on grates. Your movement is severely limited in the air. And at least on grates, you have some kind of movement. In the air, however, a lot of your momentum will just beat you out, and you're kind of locked either into moving in a direction or just going forward. Something Blob can punish really well. On this topic, Blob is really good at punishing people who don't position well, and can kind of limit people's movement to the point where they have to make a good decision fast or they will die. This is also amplified by something you thought I was going to skip, haha, how Blob is benefited by Squid Roll. There's a lot of ways, and let's cover the more general ways that any player could do very easily, even if they're not a Bloblobber player. In fact, I'm even going to change weapon to show you the value of it. This is something that benefits the whole Slosher class a lot, as they can't just burst paint really quickly. This allows for very quick bursts of movement in a certain direction, something not usually available to most weapon classes. And when done right, you can get a high amount of value. Can these doors stay open? You can just get a lot of movement out of a very simple input. It may take time to learn how to squid roll forward, but once you learn how to do it, it's definitely worth your time. And if I'm going to talk about it, I'm going to show it off in the video, because I'm not just going to tell you, hey, this thing is good. And then you're like, how do you do it? And I'm just not going to show you. No, I'm going to show you. I'm not a demon. So if you want to, so the way I've been doing it is something like that. So forward, quarter circle down, just that. Avoiding this side of the controller mostly. And you can also do it the other way around too, where it's like up, here, and then there. There's also other variations to it, up, forward, there. In other words, you just need to make it so that you go from one side of your control stick to the other to perform a squid roll. You also need to have enough forward momentum, or backwards, or whatever direction you're heading, to activate the squid roll. You can't instantly do a squid roll out of initial dashing, unless you sub-cancel. Sub-canceling, we'll talk about it in a little bit. We're just talking about squid roll, but once you have enough speed, you're able to squid roll. It's a bit rough to be able to consistently do it fully forward, as you have to like hold directly backwards while still moving forward. But it's something definitely worth practicing, especially if you're a slosher or a blaster player. We'll be covering really soon why this is important. But in general, being able to mix this into your general movement to be able to make quick turns is really nice. And it also saves you the time to need to slosh or use your, like, whatever slow option your weapon has to move around. It's something I would highly recommend learning to adapt into your play now, because as the game progresses, whether you play this game casually or competitively, people are going to get good at this, and you need to be able to keep up with those people so that you don't just have everybody run away from you for free. Because it does not matter if you're a competitive or a casual player, it is very annoying when your opponent can just run away from you for free. And sometimes learning competitive strats casually is nice because it just allows you to have more options. Now, I'm not saying this is a necessity, but trust me when I say this, having more is good. And it's not even the hardest thing to learn, and it's something you can practice very easily within the training room. Anyways, enough about X-Flow, let's talk about how it affects Blob. So, I mentioned this is especially important for blasters and sloshers. This isn't just because of their end lag, however. There is another reason, and I want to thank Frosty for bringing this up to me, and, well, showing me that it actually has an impact. It's not by much, and you have to do, like, the full. You basically have to do it in the exact direction that you're going, but I want you to listen to, like, the ticks, by the way. Okay, I just whipped it there. But yeah, I think you got a point. What's happening here is that we're using the speed gain from Squid Roll to immediately send our shots faster. All shots in this game are impacted by velocity, their range, their kill time, their accuracy for weapons with less accuracy. And Squid Roll is one of the best ways to immediately impact this. Squid Roll also stacks with swim speed, so the more swim speed you have, the larger your Squid Roll tends to be. Let me just remove my swim speed, demonstrate this. Huh. Got I switch? Did I? There you go. It's not the biggest difference in the world, but when the smallest bit of movement can impact whether you got hit or you did not get hit, it can matter long term. Is this something I recommend learning? Yes, because I think it's just genuinely really good for opening fights, at least. Or if you're already doing a Squid Roll, you can kind of cancel into it really well. But you can probably, like, if you're a casual and you don't want to learn this, then you can probably get away with it. If you're a comp player, I would suggest not focusing on this first, as there's other things I think you could practice fundamental-wise. But keep this in mind as something that you can do and can work on. I personally haven't worked on it much yet, even though I've known about it for like a few days now. Mostly just because I've been focusing on other stuff personally, and I wanted to do that. But just know that in time, I do plan to practice this and learn it, because it is it feels good. Like, it's not the biggest kill time change, it's not the biggest range increase, which, yes, by the way, it is a range increase because anything that speeds up a shot also makes it go further. And yeah. So, other than that, we've talked about the squid roll, the new stuff. Let's talk about some other new stuff, you know. Man, using Blob's kit has felt great as of late. I wonder what other Blobs think of it.
Oh, they think it's terrible.
Yeah, so let's talk about the kit, because this is probably the most controversial aspect of Blob. Though, before we get into the kit, let's talk just a little more about the main weapon. So, the things to note about the main weapon is actually its surroundings, because if we want to talk about the value of its sub-weapon, we have to talk about everything else in the game surrounding it. Right now, the best weapon in the game, unless you're talking to someone who's on crack, or a casual who's just unaware of the stuff this weapon can do, is Sloshing Machine. Notoriously, in Splatoon 2, Sloshing Machine was the worst thing for a Bloblobber to face. If you're a defensive Bloblobber, Fizzy Spam can force you back. If you're an offensive Bloblobber, Machine and Blob like to fight at similar ranges, so you have to fight with your awkward max range. And at that point, it just fizzies you, and it can get pretty annoying. Because unlike other weapons that just want to fizzy you, you can't just beat them in a fight because Machine is better at the fights. Now, there are some benefits that Blob had even in 2, where Blob actually kills faster than Machine. The problem is Machine is also really finicky to fight because it's just really, really good at fighting with giant hitboxes that are a lot fatter than Blob's. Meaning it can focus a lot on evasion, and Blob has to hit its 4 Blobs to make this matchup bearable, at least in 2 standards. In 3 standards, this matchup is even more important to have ready because while it's still bad for Blob, Blob has options to Machine's counterplay in this game. And this is important because you're going to run into this thing a lot. Does not matter if you play casually, does not matter if you play competitively, this thing is everywhere. And you're going to have to get used to seeing it until it gets nerfed. So, one of the ways that Machine currently fights Blob is it parries the first Blob, or it tries to. And even if it doesn't try to parry the Blob, using Squid Roll is a great way for opponents to try and evade Blob. So, of course, it's important for the Blob player to adjust the fact that Squid Roll exists, and they have to get ready to counter it. Though, Blob has another funny tool. A tool that allows it to somehow counter Squid Roll. Not only that, but it can be used to limit its opponent's movements. And anything that limits your opponent's movement is great, because it allows Blob to have to play less of a guessing game, and to me, the main way you want to play Blob is to simply limit your opponent's movement to the point where they just cannot win anymore and they have to take the L. Or they have to give you space, they have to go down, something like that. This is the tool I'm referring to. Yes, I'm serious. Let's go in the in-game description, and let's talk about how we're going to ignore every aspect of what the developers intended to use this thing as. A device that attaches itself to the ground or walls and sprays ink. It operates at full power right when you place it and gradually gets weaker. You can place only one at a time. So, this is the description. The intended... excuse me. Its intended way of being used is as a way to provide more paint. Now, we're going to ignore everything about a way of painting and just providing more paint overall on the map. We're instead going to use its other properties. Number 1, if you need a slight bit of paint under your feet, it does that. But it provides paint anywhere you throw it. At a wall, means you can climb it easier. Now let's cover the interesting stuff, and this is something I actually plan to make its own video at one point because there's a lot to this. Behind an opponent so they can't escape you. some spot behind them so that they can't go there directly. In front, so that their shots might get eaten up by the sprinkler, or they can no longer approach you because they can't risk taking 20 damage. Because 20 damage plus one of 3 of Blob's actual hits kills, and oh my god, I love how the patch. Oh, I didn't even talk about the patch yet. We'll end off by talking about it, okay? But it's gonna be pretty apparent as we go along in this video what the change was to Blob since the last video. But yeah, the way I personally use Sprinkler, and the way I think any Bloblobber player should, is as a trapping tool. Think of it as another teammate. You can throw it down, and it forces your opponent to do something. They have to respect this space in some way. They can ignore it, but ignoring it means they cannot take up this space reliably without taking damage. Sprinkler is not the most likely thing in the world to hit them, but if they stay in here for any prolonged period of time, they're going to get hit. On top of this, if I were to place it, let's say, here, they have to react to this, because it will kill them eventually. It's slow, but that damage adds up if you stay there. It's something the opponent has to either just not go in the way of, or they have to break. And this extra time to break it means Blob can punish them by picking them off or trapping them even more. Or if they decide to not go there, that's a spot of the map they can't go to until they break the sprinkler. They have to respect the sprinkler's existence. And while it's not something you can just use the whole time because of sprinkler's cost being a little on the sharp side, it's something that can allow you to win fights that Blob normally will just lose. Using it to set traps, even in places, for example, like against the wall there, sloshing here so that they just cannot approach you, banning your shots so that they, are locked into that. Learning to use Sprinkler is, in my opinion, something that you should learn to do long-term with Blob. Not an immediate priority, though, because there are just other things you could focus on, such as adjusting to this weird main weapon. So now that we talked about the Sprinkler, we could talk about Inkstorm, but I just wanted to get Sprinkler out of the way now, because I want you to keep in mind what Sprinkler can do as a trapping tool, because even though it sounds ridiculous, Sprinkler has already done a lot for me, and has honestly been a really surprising addition to Blob. And I'm not going to say this is any better than Splash Wall. In fact, I've already gone on record saying I'd rather Splash Wall than Sprinkler. But Sprinkler has been growing on me, and it feels wrong thinking that Sprinkler has value, but once you adjust the Sprinkler, you can start to see it has more use than many will give it credit for. And this Sprinkler kind of trapping tool, it can be used on other weapons. It's just Blob benefits a lot more than any of the other recipients. So let's talk about ways you can spread out Blob shots. The first and very obvious way, for Blob's kills. The second way is you can just fan them out very slightly to catch moving opponents. The next way is you can kind of force a volley like this. Shot high, medium, low, and fanning out in that pattern means that it's very likely that your opponent's going to take some kind of damage. This can also be used as a pretty nice painting method if you just want to spread out a lot of paint. However, I'd mostly just advise 1, 2. Speaking of paint, before we continue, Blob paints a proper thin line before the first bounce, and after that, it's once it makes contact. You kind of get the gist. On top of this, though, it's also a set amount where the Blob shot will eventually just stop painting even if it did not make the bounce. So this isn't exactly going to give you like an infinite range paint kind of option. It just exists, and it's kind of nice to be aware of. Like, as you can tell, it just did not bounce until this point, yet it stopped painting here. This is to prevent Blob from having the most broken paint in the game by far. And it's something I'm really glad the developers did, because Blob would be obnoxious if this wasn't the case, but yeah. This is something important to note, and with this in mind, just learning different patterns you can do to spread out your blob shots in the most annoying way possible is just something I'd recommend, because sometimes you don't want to just try and go for all 4 blobs at once. You just want to force any kind of damage onto your opponents. On top of this, you can also pair these together, such as a high slosh here into a ground slosh here, the high slosh being to limit movements, and kind of making sure that both your sloshes arrive at your target around the same time. In that situation, the shot would land here, here, then here, but they land in such close succession that it becomes harder to avoid than if I just did that. They can move in either direction reliably. Through this method, I give them less options, and the less options your opponent has, the more likely you are to be sloshing in the right spot and forcing them to make a mistake, or just, you know, give you space because it's becoming too dangerous to handle you. So I think that describes generally a lot of the fundamentals of Blob, and this video is already going on quite long. I could make a proper video that's scripted and all, but I'm kind of pressed for time currently, and I want to get this out before I forget about it, and I also got school stuff I want to focus on, so yeah, that'll be it for now. I didn't really cover too much about how Bloblobber wants to play, but I don't want to do that yet, as I feel like I want more time to get a proper kind of, oh, this is what Blob wants to do in a match kind of thing, you know? I feel like Blob is a lot more versatile than people are giving it credit for. And I could talk about some other things, like how Grim Shot is still in the game, aka if a blob starts a shot and dies before the shot comes out, the shot still comes out. And also it's how its kill time compares to other weapons, which it actually kills surprisingly fast. But instead, we're going to be ending the video off here by saying one last thing. Let's talk about the one change that turned Blob from one of the worst weapons in this game to, in my opinion, a weapon that is above average right now. I'm gonna shoot right here. That would have not worked pre-patch. That would have not worked pre-patch. That would have not worked pre-patch. I don't think I timed it right, but yeah, I didn't time it right at all. Okay. So what happens is that Blob's third and fourth bullet were way smaller than they were supposed to be. The third one was only smaller by a bit, and the fourth one was so small that this would not hit. Okay, well that still doesn't hit, but yeah, I think you get the point. Like, that wouldn't hit. If I aim like this, I'm not even, like, aiming at the dummy at this point. But yeah. Shots like this will not be happening in a match. But I think you can kind of get the point. And them fixing the hitbox size to be just a bit more consistent is nice. Because now Blob can actually hit its targets. And its targets don't just get hit by the fourth blob and, well, not get hits. And it's even to the point where this thing will hit when you don't actually land the blob, which is kind of crazy. And it's basically just back to how it was in Splatoon 2. So yeah, I'm going to stop stalling because this video is already getting way longer than it should have. And yeah. So anyways, hope you enjoy the video. I'll make a proper guide at some point when I feel more confident talking about it. And yeah, see you guys next time. Bye.